All right, so today we are looking at query parameters and string validations. And yeah, I've come a long way, and I hope by the end of this, I have another strong understanding, or rather, we have another strong understanding of FastAPI query parameters and string validations. So here we say, we see that they say FastAPI allows you to declare additional information and validation for your parameters. Let's take this application as an example. So we have here, okay, from FastAPI, import FastAPI, okay. Then after that, we continue to have a declaration of an instance, the path operation decorator, the path operation function having a queue function parameter, which is a query parameter, of course. And of course, it has a default value of none, but it can be a string too. Then we see that we have a dictionary here, which has a key called items, whose value is a list. Okay. And this Python list is simply a data structure storing two dictionaries whose keys are item ID and whose values are strings. And they're checking that if q, then results.update, and finally return results. So down here, they're trying to explain to us, saying the query parameter q is of could also be none. And indeed, the default value is none. So FastAPI will know it's not required, or rather optional, like we have already seen in the past two streams. And of course, they have here variants for people working in Python 3.8. And like we discovered in the past two streams, that the difference is only this, okay? Having a union instead of using this pipe to represent the annotation, okay? So yeah, I'm using Python 3.10 plus. I think I have Python 3.12, if I'm not mistaken. So this syntax will work for me instead of having to import from union. So let's continue. We have a note here saying FastAPI will know that the value of q is not required because default value is equals to none. And they're just reinforcing the point, and we have seen this again and again. So when we continue, they're saying having str or none will allow your editor to give you better support and detect errors, which is pretty cool. Okay, so we have had this kind of code before. There's no need for us to have it in our editor and try it out. So let's continue. So we're talking about additional validation. We are going to enforce that even though q is optional, whenever it is provided, its length doesn't exceed 50 characters. So they're adding more validation so that when you give the value of q, it should not exceed 50 characters. In other words, if you give like 100 characters, a proper error should be provided to the client. And the client is simply anybody consuming the endpoint. So saying the first thing to achieve this is import query and annotated. Then they say to achieve that, first import query from FastAPI, annotated from typing. Okay, so they have the two lines of code highlighted, that is annotated, imported from typing, and then FastAPI and query imported from FastAPI. So when we see this line of code, the function, the path function, the path operation function, okay? I'm almost biting my tongue at this point, switching between the terms. Okay, so we see that Q has this type, okay? When you look at this type, so let me copy this so that we do it step by step. So erase what is here and then paste, okay? And maybe drag this out a little bit. So I'll remove this, okay? And then follow the documentation step by step so that we know what is going on, okay? So the first step is define the query param, which is Q, okay? And then, okay, this by default can be none. Okay, can be none. But again, if you look at this code, we go ahead to annotate it, okay, using annotated. So we put a full colon, okay, then say annotated, okay, and this will take this full of square brackets, okay. So I want to check to make sure I'm doing the correct thing, okay. So after that, we now specify the actual type, okay. We now have to specify the actual type. So we say str, okay, or none, okay. That's the first step. If we hover over this, they tell us expected one type argument and one or more annotations for annotated, okay. But we're going to continue. So this is the first one, okay. This is the first one, okay. Then after that, we put a comma, okay, as simple as that. And this will give us the validation. So ideally, this is a string, okay, because of str or optional. And if it's optional, default value will be none, but we have a check. Okay, so let's continue reading and see what they say. And of course, they have other variants and versions, but we know this is for all lower versions of Python. Let's not go into that anymore. Let's go into the info section saying FastAPI added support for annotated and started recommending it in version 0.95.0. If you have an older version, you would get errors when trying to use annotated. Make sure you upgrade the FastAPI version to at least 0.95.1 before using annotated. So I think we are sorted because ours is I think the most recent. Then we go ahead to understand what they're talking about. They're saying use annotated in the type for the queue parameter. Remember, I told you that annotated can be used to add metadata to your parameters in the Python types intro. Okay, remember this. And simply metadata just means information about your data. In this case, information about our parameters. So they're saying now it's time to use it with FastAPI. Okay, so they're saying we had this type annotation. So I'll use Python 3.10 plus, not this. Okay, meaning Q is either a string or none, and its default value is none. Okay, so we continue. And of course, we know that this means that Q is optional. Continue to see that what we will do is wrap that with annotated. So it becomes Q annotated str. Okay, so simply we are wrapping these two, this whole thing with annotated. Okay, and this time you're using square brackets, not parentheses. Take note of that. So after that, they're saying both of those versions mean the same thing. Q is a parameter that can be a string or none, and by default, it is none. So let's jump to the fun stuff. So this, okay, and this is the same thing, okay, the same thing. So ideally, if you wanted to do this only, you're misusing annotated, okay, it's useless, okay. But where its power comes in is, for example, when you want to add something else. So let's continue to see if I'm actually right with what they're saying. So they're saying add query to annotated in the queue parameter. So they're saying now that we have this annotated where we can put more information. In this case, some additional validation. Add query inside of annotated and set the parameter max length to 50. Okay, and that's what we went through step by step in our code here. Okay, so if you have this, ideally, you're wasting annotated. Okay, there's no need for it. Only use it when you have metadata, more information. Okay, because this is simply the same as what I've highlighted up here. So in this case, annotated is important because the second argument, okay, after the comma is a query, more validation, okay, or more information. And of course, they have another variant here, but let's not go into that again because they have other lower versions of Python. So let's continue. So they're saying, notice that the default value is still none, okay, which is this. So the parameter is still optional, which is still cool, okay. So let's continue. So let's say, but now having query max underscore length equals to 50 inside of annotated, we are telling FastAPI that we want it to have additional validation for this maximum 50 characters. Super cool, right? Then we have here a tip saying we are using query because this is a query parameter. Later, we will see others like path, body, header, cookie that also accept the same arguments as query, okay, which is cool. All right, so actually, if you can guess, query is query parameters and path parameters, then body for the body. I'm just guessing. So I hope later we shall prove that I'm either wrong or right. Path for adding more additional validation for the path variable. Body for adding more additional validation for the request body. This for headers and this for cookies. Okay. If you don't know about headers and cookies, we shall see this along the way. But of course, I get the intuition very easily of what they may do because I've been working in backend for a long time. Okay. And I've built APIs for a long time. I'm just now learning how to use FastAPI to create backends. But the concepts are the same. But if I'm right or wrong, we are going to find out very soon. So they're saying FastAPI will now validate the data, making sure that the max length is 50 characters, which you already know. Show a clear error for the client when the data is not valid. We know this. Document the parameter in the OpenAPI schema path operation, so it will show up in the automatic documentation UI. And again, we know this. Let's continue. So then they're giving us an alternative, but it's old. Okay. Query as default value. Okay. So they're saying previous versions of FastAPI before 0.95.0 required you to use query as the default value of your parameter instead of putting it in annotated. There is a high chance you will see code using it around, so I'll explain it to you. Then they have a tip saying for new code and whenever possible, use annotated as explained above. There are multiple advantages which are explained below and no disadvantages. Pretty cool. So yeah, let's read on. This is how you use query as the default value for your function parameter setting max length to 50. Look at me biting my tongue trying to say max length. Let's read on. So they have an example here, okay? Being a default value. So instead of saying this is equal to none, they're giving it as a default value. Okay, the value is now query, but inside query, you can specify that the default value is none and the max length is 50. But they say if you're using current for new code, do this. Okay, do what we discussed or what has been discussed up here, not this. Okay, so take note of this. But this is good for you to know in case maybe you work in a code base and you need to update it. Okay, you need to update it. So this is good to know. And of course, what is inside here we know already. We have worked with this stuff yesterday. The first one is simply a dictionary, whose keys items, and the value is a list of dictionaries. And of course, if Q exists, then update the dictionary and then return the results. So let's read on. They say in this case, without using annotated, we have to replace the default value none in the function with query. We now need to set the default value with the parameter. Okay, this one here, default equals to none, what we discussed up. Okay, and then it serves the same purpose of defining default value, or at least for FastAPI. So they're saying doing this, okay, saying this annotation of whether a string or none is equals to default value none, okay, makes the parameter optional with the default value of none. And it's the same as this, doing this. So why suffer with this other old way? Okay, we choose the easy route. So let's continue reading this. So they're saying, but the query version declares it explicitly as being a query parameter. Okay, then they're saying then we can pass more parameters to a query. In this case, the max length parameter that applies to string. Yeah, so I take back my previous words, okay? Because it being specifically a query parameter makes it really, really important. So they're saying this will validate the data, show a clear error when the data is not valid, and document the parameter in the open API schema path operation. And they mentioned this earlier. So I guess they're just reinforcing the point. So here when we go on, they say query as the default value or in annotated. Okay. So they're saying keep in mind that when using query inside of annotated, you cannot use the default parameter for query. Keep in mind when using query inside of annotated, you cannot use the default parameter for query. Okay. So instead, use the actual default value of the function parameter. Otherwise, it would be inconsistent. For example, this is not allowed. Okay. So they're saying when you're using annotated, okay, to annotate the query parameter q, you cannot say default equals to Rick. Then you say equals to Monty. This would cause an inconsistency because you're trying to give this as the default value for Q. Okay. But again, inside the query, you're saying the default value is Rick. Okay. It's not allowed. So they're saying because it's not clear if the default value should be Rick or Monty, you should use preferably this. Okay. At once. Okay. Instead of putting default inside query. Or in older code bases, you will find q str equals to query, default equals to Rick. Okay, nice. So let's continue. Saying advantages of using annotated. Saying annotated is recommended instead of the default value in function parameters. It is better for multiple reasons. The default value of the function parameter is the actual default value. That's more intuitive with Python in general. I agree. Okay. You would call the same function in other places without FastAPI, and it would work as expected. This is nice also to know. If there is a required parameter without a default value, your editor will let you know with an error. Okay. Python will also complain if you run it without passing the required parameter. When you don't use annotated instead of the old default style, if you call that function without FastAPI in other places, you have to remember to pass the arguments to the function for it to work correctly. Otherwise, the values will be different from what you expect. For example, query info or something similar instead of str, and your editor won't complain and Python won't complain running that function, only when the operations inside error out. Yeah, so ideally what they're trying to say, use annotated, okay? So because annotated can have more than one metadata annotation, you could now even use the same function with other type tools like typer, okay? We've got the point. We've got the point, guys. Don't overstress it. I've got the point. So here they talk about adding more validations. They say you can add a parameter mean underscore length, okay, which is this. Okay. So if you come here, you can say comma mean underscore length. I'll put -2. So let me run this to prove it's working. Fast API dev. Fast API. Is it run dev? Wow. FastAPI dev main.py. Look at me. Failing at the first try. So they call chicken memory. Okay. So what's the endpoint? It's /items. Okay. I'll say /items. Okay. We get item foo, item bar. If I put the Q, I say Q. Excuse me. All right, let's continue. So question mark. Sorry, my voice has got rough. Let me try to clear it. All right, let's continue. So let us say q equals to bar. Okay, this works. If I only put one character, you see we get a good error message. Yeah, which is nice. So yeah, let's continue. So add regular expressions. Okay. I need to rest a little bit. Just a moment. Let me get back. I need to drink a cup of water and I'll be back. A minute, please. All right, let's continue. So they're saying add regular expressions. You can define a regular expression pattern that the parameter should match. And then we have here Python 3.10. Okay, Python 3.10. Then they say from typing import annotated, which of course we expected. Actually, initially I thought we were going to get rid of the typing module completely, but it appears it's actually still required. Okay, we can't do without it. Okay, so let's look at the regular expression. Okay, are you seeing this using pattern? We're saying using pattern. Pattern equals to this. Okay, so for those of you who know regular expressions, or if you don't, I'll maybe tell you briefly. This first character, if I remember right, means start. Then this dollar sign at the end means end. I think this is called the caret. So start and end. Okay. But let's read on so that they explain for us. So they're saying this specific regular expression pattern, this specific regular expression pattern checks the received parameter value. Okay. So this sim, the caret, starts with the following characters. It means this regular expression starts with the following characters, doesn't have characters before. Fixed query has the exact value, fixed query. Then they say this is for the end. Ends here, doesn't have any more characters after fixed query. Okay, meaning it should start and end with this. That's what they're trying to say. And of course, they say if you feel lost with all these regular expression ideas, don't worry. They are a hard topic for many people. You can still do a lot of stuff without needing regular expressions yet. But of course, in the world of AI, you can tell AI to help you uh, explain it, but also you need to learn because in case AI fails to give you right stuff, you know that it's wrong. Okay. Then after that, well, we continue. They say now you know that whenever you need them, you can use them in FastAPI. Okay. If you need the regular expression, use them. So here they say, so let's try this. Okay. If I copy this, okay. Before that, let me come here and fix our query parameter. I do this. Okay. Hit enter. You see, it works. We get the data that we want. It's working fine. If I come back here, okay, and say after max length, I say comma, pattern equals to that. Okay, looks like I have a rotation. Okay, paste, get back in our browser and hit. You see, we get an issue says string should match pattern this. So let me copy this, fix query, and paste it here. There we go. It works. Okay. So yeah, that's just how regular expressions work. But let's continue. Okay. Of course, other variants and versions we shall not go into this. But if you want to, please check. It's for lower versions of Python, and I'm not interested in those lower ones. Okay, let's now continue. Pydantic v1 regex instead of pattern. Okay, using regex instead of pattern. So they're saying before Pydantic version 2 and before FastAPI 0.100.0, the parameter was called regex instead of pattern, but now it's deprecated. Okay, so newer versions you don't need this, and I think it's a good thing for us to actually know this because who knows, you don't know where life could take you. Life could take you to a code base using FastAPI 0.1, and you have to work with this. Okay, so they say you could still see some code using it. Okay, so yeah, it's right here. Say regex equals to that. Okay, but it was deprecated like we know. Then if we continue, they say, but no, this is duplicated and it should be updated to use the new parameter pattern. Okay, we have default values, and they're saying you can, of course, use default values other than none. So I was supposed to bite my tongue at this point when saying other than none. If you notice, I had to take a split second to read each word carefully. Let's continue. Let's say that you want to declare the queue parameter to have a min length of 3, and to have a default value of fixed query. Okay, so we come here, you say, in query, they're saying minimum length equals to 3, and default value is fixed query. Pretty basic, okay? Pretty basic. I think there's no need for us to execute this, because by default, anyway, for doubters, okay, let's do it. So I'll copy this part, or rather type it out, okay? Type it out. So I come here and say query parentheses, okay? Then you see the minimum length, okay, is equals to 3, but the default value this time will be fixed query or something else. I'll just say internet is the fixed value, okay? So we can come here. If we hit this, okay, you see we get Q as fixed query. But if I remove Q, okay, if I remove Q, you see we get internet as the default value. So cool. And then, but if I say Q, I say question mark Q equals to E, hit enter, we get validation saying string too short. I'm loving this. I'm loving this. I'm loving this. Okay, so yeah, we know what is in the function. Again, other variants, like I've said that again and again. Let's not go into that. If you have a lower version of Python, then yeah, come into this. Then we have here a note saying having a default value of any type, including none, makes the parameter optional but not required. Having a default value of any type, including none, makes the parameter optional. Okay, any value you give, okay, makes it optional. Have that in mind. Something good to also know. Okay, so if you want the thing to be required, be sure about what you're doing. Okay, so we have required parameters. I think the opposite makes it a required parameter, but let's read. When we don't need to declare more validations or metadata, we can make the queue query parameter required just by not declaring a default value. Okay, just like this, instead of this. Okay, then saying, but we are now declaring it with query. For example, like this, okay, we have query here, minimum length of 3 equals to none. This makes it optional. So they're saying when you need to declare a value as required while using query, you can simply not declare a default value. Okay. So, let's try. I want to prove this statement right now. Okay. So I'm going to do this. Okay. Remove the equal sign. Okay. So I have not declared the default value. This is simply an annotation saying this can be a string. Okay. So I have to remove none. Okay, string or none. Okay. And then that additional information. Oh, let me see something from the definition. Okay. Instead of that, we remove none. Okay. So string, comma, query minimum length of 3. So I save, go back to the browser. I remove Q. Okay. You see, type missing, message field required. So they are right. Okay. And I was wrong to doubt them. Okay, guys, let's continue. And of course, other variants, Python 3.9, open this and check. So they're saying required can be none. Okay, let's read. You can declare that a parameter can accept none, but that's still required. This would force clients to send a value even if the value is none. you can declare that a parameter can accept none, but it is still required. This would force the clients to send a value even if the value is none. Ideally, send us something, okay? Even if nothing. Okay, let me not confuse you. Ideally, you must send something even if the value is none. So they're saying to do that, you can declare that none is a valid type, but simply do not declare a default value. Aha, this, okay? So I actually had done before, I can say str or none like that, okay? Meaning you must, but if I say equals to something, okay, it means it is optional. But by leaving that out, it means, okay, you must give us something. Let's try this, okay? So if I come here and I hit enter, okay, we say the message is field required. If I say Q, say question mark, Q equals to D, hit enter, you see, we get the string should have at least 3 characters, correct message. If I say Q is equals to nothing and I hit enter, see, should have at least 3 characters. What about if I send an empty string, okay, like that? What happens? There we go, okay? I need to find a way of passing none. What if I pass none like that? We get none as a value. I need to investigate. I don't know if anybody knows an idea, any way of testing this, how to send none. Maybe it is possible using Postman. I'll try it. But let's continue. Okay. So they're saying query parameter list and multiple values. When you define a query parameter explicitly, by the way, I've just got a thought. Why would you do this? Can someone tell me why you would do this? Right? Someone must give you something, but you're saying even none, you can give me none. I guess you just have to remove this and say, just give me information, okay, to be straight and clear. So yeah, query parameter list and multiple values. When you define a query parameter explicitly with query, you can also declare it to receive a list of values, or said in another way, to receive multiple values. For example, to declare a query parameter q, okay, this, that can appear multiple times in your URL. You can write, okay, so you can write annotated, then we have list, okay, a list of strings, or none, and query equals to none, meaning it is optional. Okay, so they're saying when you define a query parameter and you're using query, you can also declare it to receive a list of values, okay, or multiple values. So you have to use this annotation list, same way, expecting more than one value. So the annotation is list square brackets r, str, I mean, not r, but str. Yeah, which makes sense. Yeah, so they're saying then with a URL like this, let me copy it because we're going to test it. You would receive multiple Q parameter values, foo and bar. If you realize you have the first Q, then the second Q. So the first Q is foo and the second Q has a value bar. So they're saying you would receive multiple Q parameters values, foo and bar in the Python list inside your path operation function in the function Q. Good to know. And they're saying so the response to that URL would be this. Okay, let's find out. But I'm not. If I hit this, okay, hit enter. Okay, we only get Q bar. Who can guess? It's obvious because I have not changed the definition. Okay, I need to change the definition. So you have to come here and say, right here we're expecting a list, okay, of strings like that. So a list of strings. Save. Come back to the browser. Hit enter. Pretty print, say, should have at least 3 items after validation and not 2. Oh, simple. So let me just change the minimum length to 2 here. Save. And there we are. We have Q having foo and bar. Awesome. Actually, it's good to know that this validation also applies to this. Pretty cool, pretty cool. So let me continue. Where am I? Come on. Have I missed out something? Oh, I went to something else. Let me go back to where I was. Then scroll. So I used my touchpad wrongly. Someone sent me a tutorial how to use a touchpad or a mouse, whatever. So you have a tip saying to declare a query parameter with a type of list, like in the example above, you need to explicitly use query. Otherwise, it would be interpreted as a request body. This is a good tip. So ideally, if we don't have this, okay, we don't have query, this by default, okay, is a request body. If I do this, okay, something like this. So we have to actually use query. Good to know. I wish I could just have this in my mind permanently. But of course, if you're working and then you have a bug, things are not working out, then you simply check the documentation. That's why it exists. Or ask AI. And hopefully AI does not give you poison. So then they're saying the interactive docs will update accordingly to allow multiple values. Yeah, and we have seen that. Maybe we can test it out. Say API/docs. So we see for ourselves. Okay, so expand this. Okay, you see, says queues and array. What am I looking for? If I go to try it out, something I'm looking for. If you discover, I think this is older, right? Looks different. See, the way they define it here, okay, is different. Okay, but I guess it allows you to add what? Multiple string items, meaning it's a list, which is cool, okay? Okay. Yeah, so parameters queue is required, and they are strings, and you can add a number of them because it's actually a list. And here they say an array of strings, which I guess by saying array makes sense to most developers than someone reading your documentation and saying list string. What do you mean by list? Which data type is a list? But arrays, I think, are known by all developers. At least everybody who has studied computer science, I'm sure, knows about arrays. So let's continue. So they're saying query parameter list, or multiple values. So they're saying query parameter list or multiple values with defaults. So they're saying you can also define a default list of values if none are provided. Okay. So here we see from typing, import annotated. Okay, import FastAPI and query. We know what query is for. It's for defining additional information or more validation for query parameters. Then you have an instance of FastAPI, a path operation decorator, path operation function, and they're telling us we can have a list. We can define a default list of values, which is this. Okay. So, like for example, here in ours, you can say equals to a list. Okay. Then we have values A, comma B. Okay. I've made a mistake. I should supposed to have a square bracket here, then remove this other one. So yeah, this is how it's supposed to be like. Okay. Annotated. Save this. Yeah. So if I go back to the browser, okay, I switch back, okay, and I decide not to pass anything. There we are with default values A and B. Isn't that cool? Why? Because we supplied a default value here. But remember, this has to match your annotation here. Okay. Let me try it. If I do this, why is this showing me errors? Let's go to the bottom. Oh, it's fine. I was seeing an old error. If I change this to that, okay, okay, and try to execute and see what happens. You see, input should be a valid list. Input A. We gave something wrong. So yeah, should match the annotation. So I just wanted to make sure my thoughts match. So I will undo that, save, and if I get back here and run this, yeah, happy times, A and B as default values. So yeah, let's continue. So they're just basically telling us what will happen. Okay, if you go to localhost/item, default value of Q will be full bar, and your response will be like this: a JSON string having a key Q whose value is a list of two strings, full and bar. So let's continue. Then they're saying using just list. They're saying you can only use list directly instead of list str. Okay, and they say it would work. Okay. So they're saying, keep in mind that in this case, FastAPI won't check the contents of the list. Ah, okay. So ideally, you're telling FastAPI, I'm just going to give you a list of anything. And because FastAPI doesn't know what list of things you're giving it, it won't check the contents. Yeah, this makes sense. So they're saying, for example, list int would check and document the contents of the list that, let me read this again. For example, list int would check and document that the contents of the list are integers, but list alone wouldn't. This makes sense. So let's do it. I can do this, okay? And make this by default empty, okay? Okay, just leave it like by default strings. I want to try out something. I'm going to send actually integers, okay? So hit items, you see we get A and B. But what if I say Q question mark Q equals to 1 and Q equals to 1004. Hit enter. It works. Okay. But if I do this, if I say list of integers, okay, this should, and then a default value can be, maybe I can put 1. Okay. Then we run this. I want to see something. Ah, cool. I think they actually converted them from strings to integers. True story. What they told us in the what we discovered in the previous documentations of the last, I think, 4 or 5 streams. So if I change this, I make it, I execute without, say list should have at least 2 items or after validation, not 1. And that is failing because of this. Okay. So I have to put at least 2 items. Okay. Save, then get back right here. If I hit enter, you see we have 1 and 2. Cool. I like this. Let's continue. So I want to read this. So they're saying declare more metadata. You can add more information about the parameter. That information will be generated. But before that, I have something just come to my mind. Let me just make this empty and see what happens. Okay. Minimum length. Let me just say 0. Okay. I want to see what happens if I. Okay. That's what we get. Okay. Yeah, this is what I expected. Okay. It would be weird for them. Oh, but actually we have this check. Okay. So nothing would actually happen. But if I say 0, okay, put a 0. Sometimes it's just good to play around with these things. Okay, yeah, this makes sense. This makes sense. So I just made the default. I made the minimum length 0, and I put 1 item in the list, and then executed the endpoint. I just want to be sure that they're consistent with what they're saying, which is pretty good. So let me continue to read this about declaring more metadata. They say you can add more information about the parameter. That information will be included in the generated Open API and used by the documentation, user interfaces, and external tools. So there's a note here saying, keep in mind that different tools might have different levels of Open API support. Some of them might not show all the extra information declared yet, although in most of the cases, the missing feature is already planned for development. Okay, this is good to know. Actually, most cases when I'm working with things, I prefer to work with the can I call it the latest long-term support to ensure certain issues are avoided. So they're saying you can add a title. Okay. So we're seeing a title. Okay. So in title equals to query string. Let's try it out. Let's change minimum length to 1, comma, title equals to query string. Okay. So let's continue and see what they say. Then they say you can add a description. Okay. Actually, someone told me about a tool called RAF which can help with what? Organizing, formatting your code. But I think I installed one called Black. Let me try to use it. I'll put here that RAF thing later. Black main.py. Okay, we have some good formatting, which is, yeah, this now looks better. Can reduce this and maybe zoom it out a little bit. So we have, yeah, minimum length, title, query. This is much better and readable. Okay, so we know we can add a title, description, minimum length, maximum length. Let's continue. So they're saying alias parameters. So they're saying imagine you want the parameter to be item query. Like in, so they have localhost items, question marks, item query equals to foobar items. Then they're saying, but item query is not a valid Python variable name. Yeah, which is cool, which is correct, okay? Because of this character, what is it called? The hyphen, okay? Then it's saying the closest would be item query, okay? With an underscore. But they're saying, but you still need it to be exactly item query with a hyphen. Then they're saying, then you can declare an alias, and that alias is what will be used to find the parameter value. Okay, that's interesting. So they're saying alias item query. Okay. So I can just copy this. Okay, and paste it here. Next line, say alias. Wow. AI sharp item query. Okay. As simple as that. So another name. An alias is simply another name. For example, if I told you my alias is FastAPI, simply means you can call me FastAPI. You can meet me in the street and say, hey, FastAPI, how are you doing? And I'll respond to you and say I'm doing okay. Do we need to try this? Yeah, let's try it. Let me copy. Okay. Let me copy and paste. Okay. Say input should be valid. Okay, integer. Let me change this to a string. Where is that? List of str. Put str. Okay. There we are. It works. Okay. So I want to do this. If I remove this alias, okay, okay, and I hit enter, you get, say input should be a valid string, okay, because of this, I think, okay, because of this item query stuff. So ideally we would have to say q, okay, we have to say q, question mark q equals to that, and it would work. But for item query to work, this item query to work, that we have to enable the alias. So I'll just control Z, enable alias equals to item query. So meaning item query is a human readable name for Q. Okay. Where is Q? This query parameter. Yeah, things are getting nicer and more advanced at this stage. So if I run this again, this should now work. All right, so let me continue. Of course, they just show us there deprecating parameters. Wow, this has been long. I feel like this has been the second longest after the very first stream. Yesterday's stream looked short when I was talking about when I was studying the request body, The others also were relatively shorter, but this should be the longest stream compared to the first one, the second longest. So let's see what's going on here. Now they say, now let's say you don't like this parameter anymore, okay? Then they're saying you have to leave it there a while because there are clients using it, but you want the docs to clearly show it as deprecated, okay? So now, let's say you don't like parameters, okay? You have to leave it there a while because there are clients using it. Meaning you want to you want to remove it, but you want to remove it because you're maybe updating your software, okay? But there are many people who began using your software from the very beginning, okay? And they still need it. And then they're saying, but you want but you want the docs to clearly show it as deprecated. Then they're saying, then pass the parameter deprecated equals to true to query, okay? And we see that right here. Okay, I want to see that in documentation, actually. So I'll come here, next line, deprecated equals to true, okay? I save. So let me check the documentation / localhost / docs. Okay, if I open this, yeah, there it is, deprecated. Yeah, this is nice. This is nice. So let's continue. They say the docs will show it like this. I guess we've seen it. Okay. Guys who are watching, how do you find this so far? Are you understanding? Does this make sense to you? How far we have come? This should be, I think, yeah, stream 6. When we look at the title, yeah, it's stream 6. Step by step, but yeah, I love that I'm going somewhere and I've picked a lot. There's a clear difference with the knowledge I have right now with what I can do with FastAPI compared to the first stream. And I hope it's the same for you. Okay. Please let me know in the chat. So let's continue. They're saying exclude parameters from OpenAPI. Okay. So the first one is deprecating. This other one is excluding. So they're saying to exclude a parameter from the generated OpenAPI schema and thus from the automatic documentation systems, set the parameter include in schema of query to false. Okay, so let's find out that. They're saying include in schema false. Okay, so I'll come here, include in schema false, save. Okay, if I save, you see, under parameters, we get nothing. But if I change it to true, so it should turn this to true and save and get back here. There we are. We get item query back. So I guess by default, it is true. Okay, by default, it is very, very true. So let's continue. Wait, where am I? We need to go back this side. Okay, so if you've not noticed the difference yet, it is about this part. Okay, this information here. Okay, was hidden. When it is false, you won't see this information and it won't be included in this documentation here of OpenAPI. So I will go down and read this concerning custom validation. Then they're saying there could be cases where you need to do some custom validation that can't be done with parameters shown above. Of course, I'm sure any of you who has been doing backend development, even at the basic level, you know this, okay? Whether it's Spring Boot, whether it is Laravel, whether it is Flask, whether it is Express, whatever, okay? Many times, actually, you need to write your own custom validation. You want to always have things like minimum length, okay, equals to 1. So they're saying in those cases, you can use a custom validator function. And I think this is the whole concept, I think, in general in programming. Custom validation is always used either using functions, a method, or probably a string. you can use a custom validator function that is applied after the normal validation. For example, after validating, the value is a string. Okay. So after validating that you've proved that something is a string or is an integer or a list, then after that you put your custom validation. So they're saying you can achieve that using Pindatics after validator inside of annotated. Okay. So make sure we have to understand the goal of annotated. Okay. It is simply to add additional rules of validation or information to the query parameter or to the path variable. Remember, it could be about the path variable, query parameter, request body, etc. In this case, we're dealing with request. I mean the query, okay, the query parameter. So let's continue. So you're saying Pindatic also has a before. Okay, so it means before is before the first rules are applied, and after the default what is it called? Default validation has happened. Okay. So let's continue on reading to understand better, because I might be just hallucinating like some AI or ChatGPT, whatever, LLM. So let's go. For example, this custom validator checks that item ID starts with ISBN for an ISBN book number or with IMDb for an IMDb movie URL ID. Let's see. You see the import after a validator. Then they create a function, which is here, check valid ID. Okay. Then of course they say if not ID starts with one of these two, either this or this, raise a value error. But if everything is okay, simply return the ID. So we find it here. Say annotated can be a string or none, and we see that the default value is none. Then they have the after validator. So it first checks that it is a string. After checking that this ID is a string, then it performs this function check. Okay, this is very good to know. Okay, they say this is available with Pindadic version 2 and above, so we need to know about that. Okay, actually we can test this. Okay, I can copy this. Okay, and remove everything here, replace it. Okay, so the endpoint is still items. Okay, so if I go back again, really, what's this? Let me just do it by myself. I say items, just be lowercase, items, hit enter. Okay, we get that. Okay, by default. Then you can say ID equals to boa, like that. It fails, so I have to put question mark. Why? Because it's a query param, like that. You see, we get a good error. Say value error ID format. It must start with this or that. So it works. So if I put here ISBN, did they hit enter? Okay. What mistake have I done? ISBN dash. Okay. There we are. Okay. Or it has to be IMDb. Hit enter. Super cool, right? Really, really cool. Fast API, guys. I'm sure some of you are now like, okay, now I see the hype. I see the hype about this thing. I see the hype about this thing. Yeah, it's pretty. I'm impressed, guys. I'm impressed. But of course, things like Django REST framework and other stuff have similar things. Lena says concepts are making sense. We are advancing what we know about FastAPI. That's good to know, Linus, and very encouraging. Usually, it's good to learn in the community. That's why I actually decided to make my learning public. Okay. So in case you're watching and you have experience in this thing, you can share advice. Or you may actually be watching and you're a newbie like me, but you've understood the thing better. Okay. So you let me know. You let me know. So that we both win. Okay, so let's look at the tip they have for us here. They're saying if you need to do any type validation that requires communicating with any external component, like a database or another API, you should instead use FastAPI dependencies. You will learn about them later. This is interesting. I can't wait to learn about FastAPI dependencies. All right. So they're saying these custom validators are for things that can be checked with only the same data provided in the request. These custom validators are for things that can be checked with only the same data provided in the request. So take note of that. If it's not data provided in the request, then fast API dependencies, which of course I am sure we shall look at later. Okay, so let's say understand that code. So the important point is just using after validator with a function inside annotated. Feel free to skip this part. Okay, let's continue. I won't skip. If you're curious about this specific code example and you're still entertained, here are some extra details. Let's know them. String with value that starts with. So starts with is a string method, okay? A Python string method. Then they say, did you notice a string using value that starts with can take a tuple and it will check each value in the tuple or tuple. I don't know how you guys call it, tuple, okay? So they're saying this ID that starts with yeah. So ideally it checks, okay? It checks everything in the tuple. By the way, I'm happy for this part of the documentation. I didn't actually think about it. Did you guys think about it? I think I just agree that yeah, validation is working. It is checking that yeah, if the query parameter is either IMDb or ISBN, then yeah, it's okay, it's working. But I'm not. Wow, attention to detail is actually key. So I don't know whether am I losing it, am I gaining it? But yeah, I like this. So starts with we'll compare ID against ISBN and ID against IMDb. Pretty cool. I don't know if you guys knew this. Pretty cool. So they have the full preview, okay, which basically I think we don't need. Other versions of variants, we shall skip that. Let's go to a random item. We're almost there, guys. So you're saying a random item. With data.items, we can get an iterable object with tuples containing the key and value for each dictionary item, okay? Because iterable meaning something we can loop over, something we can apply a loop to, okay? So they're saying we convert this iterable into a proper list with list data.items. Why do we convert? Because they've told us this dot items method gives you a tuple. So you need to convert the tuple to a list using this list method. And this is just Python actually. Then they say, then with random.choice, we get a random value from the list. So we get a tuple with ID, comma name. It will be something like IMDb, that, then the H, blah, 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 a string. Simply two strings, okay? The ID and the name, okay? Then they're saying, then we assign those two values of the tuple to the variables ID and name, okay? So this first one will be assigned to a variable ID, and this second string will be assigned to a variable name. Then they're saying if the user didn't provide an item ID, they will still receive a random suggestion, which is nice. Then they say we do all this in a single simple line. Don't you love Python so much more than you do? Okay, so they omitted some code. So we look at the point. What they are talking about is this part. Okay, they say random the choice, random number of items. Okay, and they say list. So they're converting data.items, which is a tuple, to a list. We know that they're doing just random choice, and they unpack the item and the ID. okay? And they're getting this from their data, okay? So if ID gets item, okay, else do that, okay? So if you go to, I wanted to show you, let me not confuse you, okay? Let's stick to the documentation, okay? So they have a full preview, okay? See, so what we have actually learned today, annotated after validator. Why am I not seeing query here? Query should be here. Okay, let's continue. Then this is the data, okay? So if you think, hey, where is data coming from? Okay, it's a dictionary, okay? So when they say data.items, okay, dot items is a method on a dictionary, okay, which will give you the key and value, this key and value, okay, key value, key value, key value for each of those, okay? So when you say data.items, they'll get all the key value pairs. You'll have 1, 2, 3. Okay. But then after that, they convert it to a list. And then they randomly get any. Okay. And for each of them, they pick the first one. Like for example, they can pick this one, and its value will be in this variable ID. And maybe they pick this, whose value will be item. Pretty cool, pretty cool. Okay. And of course, Python, being Python. Wow, looks like my throat is giving away. But yeah, it's worth it. I can't even complain. It's worth it. So with the recap here, they say you can declare additional validations and metadata for your parameters. Okay. That's the goal of this. Okay. How do you add additional validations and metadata? Using query, as simple as that. But to use query, you must use annotated. So annotated is what gives you ability to add metadata to your for your query in this case. Okay. And they say what you can add, you can alias, giving it another name, you can give a title, you can give a description, or you can indicate it is deprecated, like we saw. So they're saying validations for specific strings, minimum length, maximum length, pattern, like we have known for regular expressions. And we can also use custom validations using after validator. But remember, there's also a before validator. Then they're saying in these examples, you saw how to declare why does the boat want to capsize at the last moment. So they're saying in these examples, you saw how to declare validations for string values. See the next chapters to learn how to declare validations for other types like numbers. Okay. Yeah. So we have come to the end of this. Who knew we would reach here? Okay. Look at how far we've come. We did Python types intro, concurrency, async wait. We're now in this tutorial guide. And I think with this guide, we shall be good enough. In this guide, we've done the first steps, path parameters, query parameters, request body. We're now on query parameters and string validations. Okay. So after that, let's go to path parameters and numeric validate in the next stream. Okay. Yeah, step by step, step by step. By the time you know it, we shall have reached the end. Okay, step by step, we shall have reached the end, and we'll be very, very far. Okay, and actually, they say according to their documentation, with this tutorial guide, you can be good enough, okay, to build an application. Okay, then in case you need like advanced information, you come and check the advanced guide, which of course I can do tutorials for this instead of having to do a live stream, so that when you need it, you can just check the channel and have it. So yeah, let's pick up from where we're going. Where is the tutorial guide? Yeah, so we'll be discussing this. And it looks short. Okay, looks really short. So maybe we can do this with something else. Okay, like this other one. yeah, so let's see how tomorrow goes, one step at a time. No need to push and pump a lot of information. So thank you all for showing up. I hope you've learned. And yeah, if you have a particular way, maybe a question concerning how this should be approached, let me know in the chat or in the comments section after the stream is done. So thank you all. I'm enjoying this. I'm loving this. I'm not the same. Okay. I have a lot of information now. See you in the next stream. So tomorrow, yeah, on Monday. Okay. So just look out for, yeah, I guess probably in the live section of YouTube for something. Well, I'll inform at least an hour before the stream on YouTube. Thank you all. And if you love this, yeah, share with others and let's have this run enjoyable. Talk soon.